Hey everyone, what's up? It's Smite Chess here again, and we're going to look at game 30 in the CCC11 finals between Leela Chess0 playing white, Stockfish playing black. 30 minutes on the clock each, 5-second increments, and the opening book goes as follows. So Leela plays 1e4, Stockfish plays c6, d4, d5 and knight c3, and we're into a Caro-Kann where black takes on e4, the knight recaptures, black played knight to f6, white takes, the g-pawn takes and knight to f3 by white, and this is the end of the book, and we're into quite an even opening for once. Black has just doubled their f-pawn though. Maybe potentially black may be able to get their rook out on the g-file at some point. But play continued with Stockfish playing bishop to g4, which is a natural opening move, pinning this knight and attacking d4. Bishop e2 blocks this pin. Stockfish played e6 to get the bishop out, and white castled. Stockfish played knight to d7, and Leela played c4, getting some space in the centre. Queen c7 from Stockfish, and Leela played knight h4. So now the bishop is attacking g4, and black plays h5. I think it would be a mistake for white to capture the bishop, because then this opens the h-file up for black, so that's very helpful. Instead, Leela played h3 and attacks the bishop. Now, in a previous game actually between Michael Adams and Nigel Sharp, play continued as follows with bishop takes e2, queen takes e2 and black castle queenside. White played rook to d1 and then bishop d6 from black. But actually white gained an advantage in this game where they played d5, rook de8, and white just piled on pressure with bishop to e3. After bishop c5 there's capture and b4. And white's got a very nice pawn storm coming on the queen side after knight d7, takes and c5. So it seems as though white has locked down the position here and has much better dynamic pieces, and black's got some issues with their own pawn structure. Moves like rook d6 could come in this type of game. After f5, white played rook d4, queen c7 and rook c1. And after two more moves, definitely again it looks as though white has a much better game here, and actually white went on to win this particular game. So black didn't play bishop takes e2 like in that game. Instead Stockfish just played bishop to d6. And what you're thinking is the bishop's surely on pre here, but this is actually a trick in a lot of Caro-Kann and sometimes centre counter games. If white captures this bishop, then black can proceed with bishop to h2 with check, king h1 and then play h takes g4. The point is now the rook is attacking the knight, and it also is threatening a discovered attack against white's king. If bishop takes g4, then black can proceed with rook takes, bishop h3 to block the h-file, and after castles d5, bishop d6 and bishop e3, black can play moves like rook h8 to double rooks. If queen b3, f5, rook e1, black can play rook takes and sack the exchange. With takes king g2 and rook h2. And play could proceed king f3, f4 and rook h1, takes, rook h8 and bishop f8. And no doubt black has the advantage here. I put this in the computer and play continued with queen takes e3, takes and takes. And so at the end of all this variation, black ends up with two pieces for the rook and a better endgame. Still has to fight obviously, but I think we'd all prefer to play black in this position. But back to the game. White didn't actually capture the bishop on g4. Leela is too clever for that. She actually played the move c5, attacking the bishop on d6. Stockfish checked, the king is forced to h1 and black castled queenside. But now Leela suddenly starts to pile pressure on the queen side with a pawn storm with b4. I feel like Stockfish's play is a bit clueless. They played bishop f4 now, so bringing the bishop back, trying to trade off. If bishop takes f4, then black will follow in with queen takes, and again if h takes g4, h takes g4, white may be able to play g3, but black still has some control here. They can play queen e4 check, and if king g1 they have knight e5, which is a very nice move because the d-pawn is pinned and now the queen and the rook converge on this square. So if queen e1, black can play rook takes d4, winning a pawn back. So basically black has 2 pawns for the piece. But after rook d1, takes, and queen d4, black is actually doing okay. They've got weird little threats actually. For instance, let's say white played a nothing move in this position. Let's say they played a3. Black can play rook takes h4. If g takes h4, they've got moves like knight to f3 with the fork. After bishop takes g takes, they've got queen g4 ideas with mate on g2. So in this position white has to be careful. Even if white plays king to g2, black has a couple of checks with queen to d5, king g1 and just queen d4. This is very tricky for white to deal with. So for this reason white didn't take on f4. Leela played queen to e1, unpinning itself off the diagonal of the g4 bishop. But now Stockfish starts a trade-off. They played bishop takes c1, rook takes c1, Stockfish takes on e2 and the queen takes on e2, and Stockfish camps their king in the corner to safety, king b8. So 2 pairs of bishops have just been traded, and I think this gives white a slight advantage just because of these doubled f-pawns. But Leela continued with a4, Stockfish went in the corner, king a8, corner camping, and Leela played b5, and Stockfish went knight to b8, preparing to take on c6 with the knight if white takes. Leela gets the knight back into the centre with knight to f3, defends the d4 pawn. Black played rook to d5 and Leela played rook to e1 to stop any e5 ideas. Rook to e8, so Stockfish really wants this e5 push, and Leela played queen to c2. So the queen is now on control of all these white squares. Maybe you can threaten to play queen h7 as well and start picking up parts this pawn structure. Queen d7 was played and queen to b2 now. So I think black may have potentially sacked their rook on d4. I'm not entirely sure, but Leela just seems to protect it with queen to b2. Maybe even prepares to play b6 as well. Stockfish goes back. Leela plays rook e3, and now finally Stockfish does have this e5 push. But Leela is very clever. Instead of just taking this off, which would undouble black's pawns, she plays queen to e2, stopping black from taking on d4 by pinning the e-pawn. Stockfish played knight to d7, and Leela played rook to d1. Stockfish played knight to b8, so just going back and forth, and Leela captured on c6, and Stockfish captured with the queen. So the queen's now attacking a4, but Leela now just takes the e5 pawn off and tries to trade off. I think she realises she has actually a kingside advantage here, because after d takes e5, Stockfish played rook takes c5. Rook takes d1 may have been an option, but after queen takes d1, queen takes c5, e takes f6, rook takes e3, f takes, queen d5. It's unclear as to who's slightly better here. After queen c1 with check, king h2, queen f4, king g1, and queen takes f6, queen takes h5, it's still rather unclear, but I think white may have a slight advantage, just due to this passed h-pawn, whereas black's 2 connected pawns have to deal with the a-pawn from white, so potentially white does have an edge here. Back to the game though. Stockfish actually played rook takes c5, Leela took on f6 with a discovered attack, and Stockfish moved their rook to c8. Leela played rook to e5 and Stockfish captured the f6 pawn, and Leela played rook d to d5. So now 2 rooks on the 5th rank attacking this h5 pawn. Stockfish took, Leela took back, and Stockfish played queen f4 attacking the a4 pawn. g3 from Leela, and Leela's happy for black to take this off, queen takes a4, because they can take the h-pawn, rook takes h5. Both sides have 3 pawns each, and it's a very interesting endgame, especially after Stockfish plays queen c4, because the queens get traded. King g2 from Leela and rook c8 from Stockfish. Now this will be a great position just to set up on your own board and learn how to win it, to be honest. Again, I think white has a slight advantage. The pawns are slightly more advanced up the board by 1 square, And this f-pawn is pretty much undefendable, so white's got all their pawns connected, whereas black has split up ever so slightly. So it's basically one pawn island versus two pawn islands. So Leela plays rook f5, attacking the pawn, and Stockfish has to be quite careful. If they defend it with rook f8, then I think Leela gains the advantage with h4. Let's say knight d7 and g4. And white's pawn storm is rather quick, and they're going to promote to a queen really fast. So in the game, defending it wasn't really an option. Black played knight to c6, and Leela just got on with h4, probably realising this is the key to the win. Stockfish played a5, and Leela played knight to d2. Both sides started pushing the pawns. Finally, Stockfish does defend, and Leela prevents a3 with knight to b1. Stockfish went king b8, and Leela plays king h3. King c8 from Stockfish, and now rook to f4, attacking the pawn. And this is the point actually, because I thought maybe Stockfish could play b5, but actually after a long analysis session I realised white is just winning. They can play knight c3, attacking both pawns. If knight a7 to defend, then white plays g4. If f6, then white can play g5. If rook h8, there's g takes f6, rook takes with check, and king g4 attacking the rook. If the rook goes back, then white can just start pushing their king up to g5. If king d7, it's just not fast enough. f7 comes. Rook f8 is forced, and then king g6. If black tries to counter with a3, then white plays king g7. Rook a8, white gets a queen, takes, knight c6, knight takes b5, a2, and white is just in the nick of time with rook to a8, and black's going to lose this game. So b5 actually loses for black. So Stockfish plays king to d7, rook takes a4 from white, and after this rook captures this a-pawn, this seems to be game over for black already, to be honest. In a human game, I reckon b5 would have worked, but in a computer game it just didn't seem to have the desired result for black. Black continued with b5, but now Leela plays rook to a6, there's b4, knight d2 to stop b3, king c7 and f4, and white's just basically going to start launching the pawns up the board, and there's nothing really black can do. They attack the knight goes to b3, king b7, rook a2, and white's just scuppered black's plan of advancing this b-pawn. Knight to e7, king h4, king c6, and then rook c2 with check. King b5 and then g4, launching another pawn up. King a4 doesn't really work because now Leela plays a nice move, rook d2, preparing to trade rooks off. Black doesn't need this. White checks, king goes back, knight to e4, and king to c6. And Leela plays knight to f6. So white pretty much has this under control. Rook h8, king g5, king b5, now rook d7, getting on the 7th rank and attacking the knight. The knight goes to c6 and white plays knight to e4. The point is, if black plays b3, white can play rook b7 with check, and if king a4, there's moves like knight to c5 winning the pawn. So in the game, rook g8 was played, the king went backwards, knight d8, knight d2 stopping b3 again, king c6 attacking the rook goes to d4, king b5, check, king c6 and rook f5 attacking f7, stopping the knight from moving, rook e8 from Stockfish, and Leela carries on with h6. Stockfish gets behind white's pawns, but then just comes g5. There's a few checks, but eventually, after a couple of moves, Stockfish is a bit stuck. Play rook h4, king g3, rook h1, king g4, and eventually, after a few moves, we see that Leela slowly encroaches and starts pushing these pawns up. So the king gets to h6, and this is now game over. The king takes the rook. Play continued on for quite some time, but this is an easy win for white now. They're just going to push these pawns up and get a queen. Finally Leela gets a queen. Actually she should get another queen, but she gets a knight for some reason. Play continued on for quite some time. until it was king and queen checkmate once again with queen h2 mate. But I think this game just demonstrates how a slight inaccuracy or slight weakness can be exploited by these two powerful engines. If we just go back to this position, maybe in a human game this could lead to a draw. I actually think this is the position where the best player would win, but Leela just has a better position ever so slightly due to one pawn island versus these two pawn islands. And it was a great demonstration of how to win this game. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'll bring you the next game very soon. Please drop a like, comment or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers for watching.